And you're live on PM Express tonight. Tonight is a very interesting conversation on the report that was submitted just last week, Thursday. The Short Commission report, an end to party militia, something that they've been looking into for the last 1 month. And you find the name in the party militias. It's one of the things we've been interrogating as the impact of that commission. They introduced that nomenclature into our national discourse. That has generated a lot of controversy. We'll look into that nomenclature. Just that name, it sparked a huge controversy. That's why this conversation is really interesting. Now, we know the Short Commission, led by Chairman Emil Short, presented this report just last week, Thursday, to the President. The Commission met its 1 month deadline that was given to it, the shortest commission possible. The President was so excited that they had met that 1 month period that they were given to do the work. The background, of course, has been, there's a lot said about the background. The setting up of the commission, we know, was triggered after the disturbances at the Ayawaso West Wagon by-election that we saw a lot of this happening. You see some George there, one of those who came before the commission, was himself assaulted. At the back of that, the commission was asked to make a full, faithful, and impartial inquiry into the circumstances leading to the Ayawaso West Wagon violence. Also, to identify and also any person responsible for or who has been involved in events associated with the violence and the injuries, as we've now become aware of. In fact, there's one person who the commission had to move their regular location to a hospital to speak to because he was injured in the process. That is the individual in your shot there. His leg is still shattered. Okay. We know that the background, also to inquire into any matter which the commission considers incidental or related to the causes of the violence and events associated with the Ayawaso West Wagon by-election that we all came to talk about quite frequently. Now, and this is an interesting bit, to submit within 1 month its report to the President, giving reasons for its findings and recommendations, including appropriate sanctions, if any. So did they make any recommendations for sanctions to be applied? We don't know. Well, when the President received it, he gave his response. He says he's confident that the work of the Commission will bring closure to political-related violence. That is huge expectation on the shoulders of the Commission. So is the Commission confident that that report delivers on the President's expectation? We'll find out. Nanado again has assured that he will give the findings and the recommendations utmost attention. And many people are watching if this will happen. He again says government will study the findings and recommendations of the report and give its opinion if need be. But has he got a choice? Must he give us a white paper at all costs, or does the Constitution allow him room to even say he will not give us a white paper? That's what we'll be talking about as part of the conversation tonight. What does the Constitution say a commission can do at this moment that the report has gone to the President? We know that the President, Akufo-Addo, says any decision taken will be influenced by government's determination to ensure the rule of law and protection of Ghanaians, really at the heart of whatever consideration there will be. This is a big question. So what is next after the presentation of the report to the President? That is one of the key things that we're going to be examining tonight. And with me to do that tonight is the former Executive Secretary of the Ayawaso West Wagon by-election, Mr. Kofi Abotsi. I emphasize former because I nearly said he's still the Executive Secretary. He's not. I'm right, Kofi? Yes. And grateful that you join us here on PM Express.
Thank you, Evans.
When we return from this break, we'll be examining the matters. Now that the report has gone to the President, stay with us because fascinating conversation we are going to have tonight on PM Express. You're live on PM Express tonight, and my guest, as you already know, is a former executive secretary to the Yawaso West Wagon by-election commission of inquiry, Mr. Kofi Abotsi. Mr. Abotsi, so it's been a tough last 1 month, and I'm assuming that that is an accurate description of the time that you've had, correct?
It has been.
It's been. The president, when he received your report last week, Thursday, said that he was full of praise for the work that you've done and completing the task in, quote, record time. This is 1 month. Nobody thought you could do this. In fact, I thought the realistic expectation was that you're going to ask for an extension of time. And when the time got close, we all took it for granted. You were going to ask for extension of time. There's no way you put this report together in less than a week. But you did. How did you pull it off? So
there are three functional reasons that informed our having to respond to the time deadline that was inserted in our terms of reference. We recognize, first of all, that there's a certain urgency attending the issue, and that given the public interest, the heightened public interest that characterized this, there was a certain necessity in reverting in good time to the good people of Ghana through the president. And therefore, if the president has set up a commission and has put in there a specific time frame, clearly that must be informed by the necessity of reporting early, given the circumstances of the time. So the heightened public interest is one. But the other reason that informed us having to do this very quickly is the fact that we recognize that given the sheer complexity of the subject implicated by the investigation, if we have to finish this, make any recommendations that are likely to be of any utility to Ghanaians in terms of implementation, then this has to be made in time, in good time, because we're dealing with elections, and since Ghana is going to the major polls in 2020, any reform or reforms that we make, suggested reforms by way of recommendations that we make to the president, may require a certain length of time for purposes of deployment, for purposes of implementation, among others. And so there was a necessity to finish this in good time. And so the time factor was also informed by the fact that we are in an electoral season, very close electoral season, which will dawn on us very, very quickly as soon as next year is held. And the third reason, and that probably is the most strategic, most vital reason, and that is any request for an extension of time would involve or entail more than just the president having to issue an extension. And the reason is the time frame that was actually given us was etched in statute. It was in the CI. That's one thing a lot of people didn't pay attention to. So if you read CI 111, it's actually stated therein that we shall report within 1 month.
I see.
So any attempt at an extension will have to require another constitutional process.
Wow.
They will have to amend the statute, and it has to go through either a parliamentary debate very quickly, or if Parliament doesn't adopt it, it has to be before Parliament for 21 days. And that time period was simply not there. So for pure reasons of feasibility and strategic reasons, among others, those informed us. And so as we set about just trying to do the work, we came to the conclusion that we have to do all it takes to just finish the work within one time in as best a manner as we could.
And that, I guess, is the thing that people look at and say, okay, you know what they say, more haste, less speed. Because if you haste too much, the possibility that you miss stuff is great. And I'm just wondering what mechanisms, was the commission aware of this? Because of the volume of evidence you've received, the complexity of what you were asked to deal with, and the time frame that you were giving, nobody thought it was realistic. Was the commission aware that, yes, we need to do and meet all the time frames that you've elaborated on, but it's better to get this right than to do it on time?
So the commission recognized this, that there was a need to combine speed with efficiency. So the commission adopted a methodology that recognizes this.
Okay.
One, we're going to combine depth and scope with efficiency and speed. And anyone who watched the proceedings on TV will admit that the commission covered, I mean, if you don't want to be charitable, you would say virtually. But if you want to be charitable, you would say the commission actually covered the entire scope and spectrum of the investigative mandates that was given the commission. Virtually all witnesses who were deemed relevant witnesses were spoken to.
Okay.
And I'm happy to have anybody point out to me someone who's relevant but who wasn't called. But virtually all witnesses who were deemed relevant, from victims to, quote and unquote culprits, to any other person who may be deemed to have played a certain role in the activities or events of 31st January was called. So the commission combined the virtues of speed and efficiency with the necessities of scope and depth. And I can assure you that we actually went as far as we were supposed to go. And so the mandate was achieved, the purpose was achieved. Look, the commission sat all day for virtually the entire period of the investigation. And the commission secretariat worked overtime, including Saturdays, just to ensure that this is actually done. So I guarantee you that the work that has been submitted to the president, and I'm confident the president knew what he was talking about when he actually said.
And just to quote the president, just on the back of that, the Daily Graphic quotes the president as expressing, when he received the report, expressing optimism that the findings and recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry into the Yawaso by-elections will help rid the nation of the canker of politically related violence, which has regrettably become part of our Ghanaian politics. Now, can you say with all certainty that the report you submitted to him meet that expectation? Because that is such a huge verdict. The president's expectation that this will rid the nation of that canker.
Okay.
Can you say that with certainty?
First of all, the president was speaking in an expectant mood.
Okay.
First of all, get that. But second of all, too, and I know you're trying to trick me into saying something about this, but I'm unable to speak to the content of what we presented to the president. And I can't even say whether or not it's of a certain threshold, because by saying that, it means I'm prejudging again what we submitted to the president. What I can tell you is that the commission and the commissioners, together with the secretariat, have done work that in our expectation meets the overall mandate that was set. It is up to the president to judge and make a decision on whether or not the reports that were submitted in terms of the specifics that were required actually meets his expectation. But
you think it will meet his expectation?
Again, you're asking me to speak on
our
something.
expectation?
You're asking me to speak on something.
No, not to the specifics. Not to the specifics. Just an expression of your confidence in the report you've given out to the president, or to our president. I mean, you give it to him on our behalf. You're confident that our expectations will be met at the end of the day when we see the report finally.
Let me be clear. The commission's report, in many ways, reflect what you all saw.
Okay.
So I'm not going to speak about the content, but there's a reason why there was a public broadcast of proceedings. All Ghanaians were actually participants in the writing process. What the commissioners did was to take the evidence, to review the evidence, and in light of both the law, the evidence, the factual circumstances of the entire event, their own field investigation, among other reasons, to put that together in a narrative that can be distilled for purposes of reforms moving forward. And so, in a sense, all of us were participants in the report writing because we actually saw what went on television. Again, just out of sheer decency and protocol, that's the reason why I'm not able to disclose and to go into the details of what we've submitted to the president. There's a certain protocol and structured procedure in these things that once you hand it over to the president, it becomes the president's report. And when it is the president's report, I'm out of step to make comments about a report I've submitted to the president which has not been officially made public yet. And so you have to forgive me for that, but I'm unable to make specific comments on that.
So let's talk about what we all witnessed then, because that you can talk about, because we saw it, it's on television. What has been the greatest impact of the commission for you?
I think the biggest, if you like, the biggest legacy or the lasting legacy of the commission's work is, first of all, a statement on the fact that when you have things that challenge the state, when you have activities that, as it were, undermines the security of this country, there must be a certain urgency to attend to these. And I think that in that respect, the president's action was commendable. The fact that he recognized that this was in the public interest. Now, mind you, the powers of the president under the Constitution to set up commissions of inquiry is a discretionary authority that the president can exercise or may fail to exercise. Now, the president has to make a judgment, come to a conclusion that a particular activity is in the public interest. That's what the Constitution says. So for the president to actually set up the commission, the president would have come to that threshold judgment, that we have met that public interest threshold, and that there's a necessity to set up the commission. In this respect, I think the president deserves some commendation for setting up the commission. I think in terms of legacy, it demonstrates once again our determination and desire to, as it were, meet some of these things that challenge our governance paradigm from a not only a democratic standpoint, but also an enduring standpoint, so that there will be a lasting legacy moving forward. Again, without touching on the content of the report, whatever recommendations that are contained in the report are supposed to reflect, one, the status quo, and two, the way forward, like many recommendations. And if the status quo is anything to go by, given what we all witnessed at Ayawaso, then clearly the status quo is problematic. And speaking as a member of the public and from the various commentaries that have been given on this, from the totality of evidence given at the commission, I think a lot of people basically just said, look, the status quo is not satisfactory, so something ought to be done about that. So the report obviously reflects the status quo. And reflecting the status quo, the report invariably will also contain recommendations, and these recommendations are designed to rectify the difficulties, the challenges, the problems with the status quo. And so if there's one major legacy of this commission, it is that it represents a significant intervention in the political arrangement, the constitutional arrangement, and the security arrangements of Ghana, so that moving forward, we can consolidate our democracy. Because it's important for us to understand this. No democracy can survive without political stability. And indeed, if anybody is a student of Ghanaian history, will know that we have the Fourth Republic because we've had 3 republics. And the reason we have 3 republics in the past is because we've had episodes of military interventions. So political stability is probably the biggest oxygen, if you like, to the current democratic dispensation. And in that regard, nobody can toy with security and stability. So attending to this with the swiftness and urgency required, I think, is one that deserves commendation. And therefore, moving forward, if you ask me about impact, that's one thing I say can be credited to the setting up of the commission.
In terms of his work, what played out in public, though, for me, and sitting where I sit, one of the greatest impacts has been its ability to influence the discourse on political violence, for example. It shifted, first of all, 2 things for me. One is, for the first time, it allowed us to see the face of the problem like we've never seen before. Right? So before your commission, we knew that something existed called party vigilance. We knew political violence existed. But we haven't done anything about it because we didn't really know what it is until the commission was set up, until we started calling witnesses in public. Then we got to know, wow, is it that bad? Do you get us an impression? Do you agree with that? That this is one of these abiding legacies, even without seeing the report? Just listening to the public discourse that went on when the commission, it trended every day, every day, because we were shocked by what we were hearing and seeing and watching on television. You agree with that legacy?
I see your point. I'm not sure whether it's agreement or disagreement, but in terms of us knowing that there's a certain reality, but we are unable to corroborate the reality from a standpoint of officialdom. I think to that extent I agree with you that yes, before the commission, there was a certain recognition that, political party vigilantism existed. What is the character? What is the scope and nature? What are the dynamics? These are things that we can all guess about. But in terms of the commission's work, then there was a certain recognition in terms of, from the standpoint of officialdom and from the standpoint of people who are speaking, having sworn an oath. I'm speaking about both those who are officials and those who are not officials. Now, I think the reality is this. One thing that became clear from the evidence before the commission, which again we all saw on TV, so this is not private information, this is public because on TV, was the fact that there was a certain admission and denial all at the same time. Yeah. So you had the admission of use. In other words, do we use party vigilantes? Yes, all the parties said yes. Or not all the parties, let's say the party officials and the people who had political coloration who appeared before the commission seem to have admitted that yes, we use party vigilantes. But then there was a certain denial. And the denial is, do you own the party, the vigilantes? And then that I saw, I said the universal denial. Again, the party which appeared, and then officials of other parties who may have appeared. There was a certain denial that we do not own them, but there was an admission that we use them. And I think that has also played out publicly from the discussions about various political parties having to meet. I think the president's directive that they should meet and try and resolve the vigilante thing. The parties appear generally not to deny the fact that they use them, that these vigilantes sometimes go out there and operate in their names, but they are not owners of the vigilante. I think of the vigilante groups. I think that may again be the interesting aspect of the work of the commission in terms of the dynamics of the relationship between the political parties and the vigilante groups. There's a denial of ownership, but there's an admission that these parties, these vigilante groups operate in ways that benefits the political parties. The key strategic question, though, is whether any political party in Ghana even needs vigilante groups.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a key strategic question because let's face it, if you're a party in power, you have monopoly over the use of state authority. You have monopoly over the use of state force. So the military, the police, and other police and military entities. You have monopoly over their use. So if you're the party in power, you don't need them. Now, if you're the party in opposition, no matter how big and strong your vigilante groups are, they are no match for the state authority. Therefore, you are the one who has an interest in ensuring that police and military institutions of states are used in a non-partisan way for the protection of all. Because the establishment of vigilante groups may give an excuse, for example, to a governing power to suppress. Yeah. And then for you in opposition, actually having these groups not only delegitimize your action because it makes you look like a paramilitary entity, and therefore you give the excuse to the one in power to actually go after you. But you undermine your own claim to if you care, leadership, because the Constitution clearly has said don't do that. The Constitution has indicated that no party, no body in this country should set up a state entity. So if you're in power, the logic flies, I mean, this flies in the face of logic, that you set up a vigilante group given all the force, the sheer force of state that you have behind you. And if you're not in power, you give the excuse to the one in power to actually go after you for having set this up. So in my own personal reflection, when I ask the question, what is the strategic advantage of setting a vigilante group, both in and out of government, I find no reason. There's simply no basis. But that is what can be called counterfactual. It flies in the face of facts. As we speak, there are vigilante groups. True. So it's not a question of whether there should be or there shouldn't be. And I think moving forward, there's a need for a stepping back of both of the leading parties we have in Ghana. I mean, the two leading parties that we have in Ghana, both of whom apparently at a certain level, either openly or tacitly admitted that they benefit from the use of these vigilante groups. I think there must be a certain reckoning and recognition of the fact that these groups are counterproductive, whether they are in power or out of power.
Yeah, one of the biggest legacies, I guess one of the more controversial ones, was the introduction of the nomenclature militias and warlords. It was Professor Ernest Abotsi. And in fact, I remember, because it was when I was before the commission when this came up, the chairman also supports that view of party militias. It's possibly one of the most talked about stuff. Because when I got out of the place, we decided to start a campaign. And we switched from using party vigilantes to party militias because the commission said so. And we thought we agree because Ernest Abotzi's reasoning was simple. If you call it what it is, you shock people into action. And she's drew for her experience from across the continent. You look back to that and look at the sheer volume of controversy that has generated since. We're still debating that now, right? Part of that has become the center focus in Manasseh's work recently, which government objects to, and all emanated from the commission's work. Does that make you feel proud that, or does it look back and say maybe that is? What's your view on that? Because that is possibly one of the most abiding memories that you take away from the commission. Now it's become the thing.
Well, the commission's work didn't inspire
Manasseh's work.
No,
so, of course.
You know, just so we don't get that confused in that apparently started long before the commission came into being. I am a strong supporter of appropriate diction and appropriate concepts. And I think in this particular regard, I support the commission's stance.
You do?
I do support it. Now, let's face it. A vigilante has a certain definition. A vigilante plays a complementary role. A vigilante has a responsibility to come in, takes upon the responsibility of coming in when the mainstream, when the authorized body fails. So a vigilante plays the role of filling in the gap. Let's analyze what Ghana has, or the scenario we have. The party vigilantes don't purport to wait for the police to fail for them to come in. These are entities and these are bodies that literally challenge the police.
True.
I mean, you see the police you see them sometimes struggling with the police for space as far as ensuring security in, say, by-elections or elections are concerned. And therefore, using this concept of vigilante, in my opinion, appears a misnomer. Now look at militia. A militia may appear to be a heightened concept, but it still embraces these groups. Now the way it embraces them is this. A militia is supposed to fundamentally have a paramilitary or a quasi-military characteristic in terms of how it does its things. So one thing is discipline, and discipline in quotes in terms of training. The other thing is a certain structure and hierarchy. The other thing is, the claim to having a certain, if you like, military leadership, and that they listen to a certain chain of command. Mm-hmm. All these features may or may not be present, but you may have one, two, or more present. Yeah. And so the reality is that there's a certain evolution, even if they're not there yet in many ways, even if some of them, are not there yet, there's a certain evolution to move away from the current status, i.e. plain just vigilante, to the position of military or quasi-military or paramilitary. Because the truth of the matter is that these groups are increasingly recognizing that there's a competition. Now, in competition, the concept that could be used appropriately here is what is called the race to the bottom, which in this case could be the race to the top. And the race to the top could be an amassing of weapons to challenge each other, because there's a certain recognition that there's going to come a point in time where one will have to outdo the other. And if you don't outdo each other in how mature you are and how big your guys are, you have to outdo each other in what kind of weapons you're holding. And if you don't outdo each other in that, you have to outdo each other in how sophisticated you guys are as an organized military force. The reality is that the commission recognized, having listened to some evidence at that point, don't forget, the commission didn't say this from day one. True. The commission has sat for a few days and was beginning to see a certain picture and was beginning to see from the evidence that was given before the commission a certain trend developing. And that's why the commission said, let's use the appropriate language. Let me give you an example. For many, many years, this continent suffered from the brutal practice of what used to be called female circumcision. Mm-hmm. And I remember that when it used to be called female circumcision, it was a challenge. Nobody cared. Because circumcision is not that brutal. Circumcision, men are circumcised, and it's supposed to be hygienic, it's supposed to be medical. So in order to challenge the status quo and in order to suppress the practice, the advocates against female circumcision decided to change the language. They moved from female circumcision to female genital mutilation. Now, picture this.
Which is a very brutal picture.
It is brutal. You're not talking no more of a medical procedure. You're talking of a mutilation, a destruction. Yeah. Suddenly, female circumcision lost every legitimacy that it had among advocates who said that was culturally good. And everyone was ashamed to even become an advocate for female circumcision. In the light of that alone, female circumcision has substantially had all but been eradicated from the continent. I think that appropriate language, when used strategically and deployed properly, can achieve fundamental results.
But back to the militia question, we'll take a break shortly, but this is important. The government disagrees that these groups can be called militias. In fact, they state the true, original, technical definition of militias as it relates to military practice, as it relates to the bearing of arms. And they say, these groups cannot, by any stretch of imagination, be called militias because, one, we don't see them with arms. And if they train and they go on the jogging and whatever they do, they don't bear arms. So how do you possibly describe the Azoka boys, the Invincible Forces? And you have evidence before you of the various names that these groups have that they don't have. They haven't evolved to the militia. In fact, I could make this point over the weekend. They haven't evolved to the militia yet. They are still at the vigilante group. And to give it that nomenclature at this moment, one is wrong. One, in fact, there's a case that is already before court because challenging the description of one of those groups as a militia. That is the evidence government has against you, against the commission, that it is wrong to call that by that name now because it's technically not so.
Okay, I haven't heard the government's response on this, and I will take your report on the face of it, but I think it's important for us to also look at things in an evolutionary trend. As I mentioned, I think that these party vigilante groups started off as proper vigilante groups. Mm. I think they started off with good ideas and good thoughts of defending the party's interest, where, for example, the police stood aloof. So they may have started with good ideas, among others. But I think also that we cannot ignore the fact that over the years, these parties have become more and more emboldened, and they've gotten to a point where, frankly, they see themselves as bigger than vigilantes. Don't wait until there's a failure. They actually act, and they challenge, and they oppose, in many ways, the authority of the state. I think it's in that respect that I have a little difficulty actually I have a little difficulty still staying stagnant with the concept of vigilante. Let's face it, what happened recently in Kumasi that led to the death of an NDC, some people in the NDC, for example, in Kumasi, were told that was supposed to be gunshots. Yeah. Now, that was force of arms.
True.
We don't know who these guys are, and we don't know whether they belong to a vigilante group or
the police
militia.
Suspect. The police suspect.
But the suspicion is there.
Yes.
But the suspicion is that they belong to an identifiable group.
Yes.
And that identifiable group is supposed to be a vigilante in quote or a militia in quote. Yeah. The reality is that we cannot discount the fact that any or all of these groups do bear some level of arms. Yeah. If you have to go into the technicality, then one is going to look at threshold issues and to decide whether or not you have to bear a certain quantum of arms, a certain caliber of arms, a certain weaponry before you can be classified as a militia. But from the experience of many African countries that have gone through these, as Professor Ernest Abotsi calls it, warlordism, these warlord business, the militias and groups differ in sophistication, differ in organization, differ in architecture, differ in military structure, differ in orientation, differ in discipline, differ in the various codes that one can actually, one can actually ascertain to come to a conclusion of whether or not they are militia. As I indicated, for me, the reason I support the Commission's position on this has to do with the fact that these have moved away from being regular vigilante groups. And the vigilante groups fundamentally are complementary in character. These groups oppose. I mean, they fight, they come on their own. They don't wait for there to be a failure for them to fill the gap. Therefore, that fundamental feature of vigilantism, in that respect, I think these groups fail. In terms of militia, I think that these groups, in the minimum, they are evolving towards it. At worst, many of them have crossed the threshold and they are already militia.
You want to stay with us, young people? When we return, we'll get into the question about, so what happens to the report now? What the Constitution says will happen. I mean, the report has been submitted to the President, so what now? I know the Commission is done with its work, but what does the law say as far as the Commission's work is concerned and the report that the President has? Plus, is there anything mandating the President to publish the report, and when? Because it's a public interest question here. We were interested, glued to our seats for 1 month. Now the report has gone in. Are we entitled to see that report even before the white paper? And is a white paper mandatory, or the President can make a decision whether to issue it or not? And then there are a few controversial issues that we'll touch on also, including the all-important, mighty little question about, a certain WhatsApp message that was produced on a certain show to prove that a certain individual was denied access to make a point before the Commission. Stay with us here on PM Express. Still here on PM Express. My guest is the former executive secretary to the Ayawaso West Wuogon by-election commission of inquiry, Mr. Kofi Abotsi. Mr. Abotsi, so the Constitution says that the President shall, subject to clause 4 of this article, cause to be published the report of a commission of inquiry together with a white paper on it within 6 months after the date of submission of the report by the commission. And the 4 is one interest I'm interested in. It said, where the report of a commission of inquiry is not to be published, the President shall issue a statement to that effect, giving reasons why the report is not to be published. And so it is not automatic that the report will be published, is it? It's not automatic.
Absolutely.
In fact, even the white paper, it's not automatic that the white paper will come.
That's correct.
Okay. Because I always thought once a commission report goes, white paper is automatic. But I read that the government issues a statement in the Gazette. Okay, so a finding of the Commission of Inquiry shall not have the effect of the judgment of High Court. It's 6 months that passed. 6 months have passed after the findings is made and announced to the public. The government issues a statement to the Gazette in the national media that it does not intend to issue a white paper on the report to the commission, whichever is earlier. My question to you is, should it be published?
Should it
be published?
I will pass that.
Why?
I will pass that. I will pass that again because, out of just sheer decency to His Excellency the President who mandated us to do the work, and the work having been completed, we have gone through process and protocol. We have submitted to His Excellency the President. The President should be granted the benefit of the doubt to have the soundest of judgments, which is better than mine, and indeed better than us, being our President, to decide, having digested the report, what's in the best interest of Ghanaians, whether this is in the circumstances of his own experience and knowledge and in the benefit of advice of his top advisors, whether this makes sense in the public interest. The good thing is the Constitution ensures that there are checks and balances to all these things. And so if the President decides, for example, not to publish it, the President must give reasons why that cannot be done. And then, of course, that will be subject to, I'm sure, the court of public opinion to evaluate whether or not the President's decision is...
Which is the most powerful court of the land, actually.
Well, you can say
even more powerful than the Supreme Court. Politicians react to that even more than the Supreme Court. So,
you can say that,
what about the white paper? You expect a white paper?
Again, I can't second guess the President in this respect. The Constitution again just says that where the President decides not to publish, not to issue a white paper, or rather where the under Article 282, that the President can actually decide not to issue a white paper on this, in which case there must have been an explanation to that effect. So when any of these events, one of those options are exercised, none or the other, the President has to give a certain explanation to Ghanaians. But that's it. The President is expected to exercise judgment. Now, there's a reason for this. There's a reason why the framers of the Constitution actually created these leeways in the best interest of Ghanaians, for the national security of Ghana, among other good reasons. The President may come to a conclusion that the Commission of Inquiry, the report to the Commission, will not be disclosed at all, will be partially disclosed, or be fully disclosed.
In the public interest, should it?
I'm sorry?
In the public interest, should it?
Again, as I've already said, I'm
not
going
disclose it.
No, I'm not going to second.
Now, tell me, there's something about the powers of the Commission that you have the opportunity to exercise, which is the power to summon documents and people. You invited the NDC, the MPP, General Secretary. He came before you. You also invited the General Secretary of the NDC. He said he would come. You didn't subpoena him.
We didn't subpoena the NDC. We didn't subpoena anybody, and there's a reason for that. We didn't find it necessary.
But nobody turned you down but him. The General Secretary of the NDC turned you down.
Correct. Yes, the General Secretary of the NDC turned us down. Yes, we invited him.
But you had the powers to compel him to come.
We had the powers to compel him, and we had to make a decision on whether we still needed to even exercise that power in light of a variety of reasons. I mentioned, first of all, don't forget that even the winner of the Ayawaso West Wugon constituency, the election, was not invited. Well, she was invited, but she was not ultimately heard. There was no evidentiary process for her. Now, the reason for that is that the Commission has been going through a process of examining and re-examining and reviewing its own invitees. And so if we think that you are relevant today, but in light of how things have panned out, in light of evidence given, in light of the totality of new facts coming before us, we think that your testimony has been rendered, if you like, nugatory by reason of some other previous testimony of other people. We may not push you to come. In reality, and I can say this to you, in reality, the political parties were seen as peripheral to this whole investigation. And part of the reason for that is because we recognize that there were individual actors. And so there were a lot of people who came, or there were witnesses who came before the Commission who were known NDC actors. One of which, of course, is the NDC parliamentary candidate for the area, and the other is the Honorable Sam George, who is a member of parliament for the NDC. So we had critical NDC actors who appeared before the Commission, and frankly, in the assessment of the Commission, the testimony of these people covered in some ways.
So that's why you didn't push the Johnson Student Ketia?
In some ways, because the testimony, and if you pay careful attention to this, the testimony of the NPP, John Boydu, his testimony was in many ways a testimony of party position, as opposed to a testimony of party activity. Now, we're interested in party positions, no doubt, but we're mainly interested in activity. because our primary responsibility and mandate was to investigate activity, what you did, what happened on that day. And so position and policy is ancillary. And the testimony of these high officers is in many respects position, because a good number of them were actually not on the ground. And even more so not on the ground of the event. I'm talking about the La Bawalishi school,
True.
where a chunk of things happened. And so we were in a constant flux of evaluating and re-evaluation of our own positions. And so as time went on and as things panned out, we obviously may have come to a conclusion that the NDC, it would have been great if they had showed up. It would have been great if the NPP
Did it take anything away from your work?
With the greatest respect, I think not, particularly because we had NDC actors. And so in my opinion, if you ask me, I mean, and if you ask me, I think the NDC actually cooperated in some ways.
Yeah.
The NDC wrote to us explicitly saying they won't cooperate. Now, even in my line of practice as a lawyer, I'm very slow to go for that tool or that instrument of law called a subpoena.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is the horse drinking principle. I.e., if you force the horse to the riverside, you're going to have a hard time getting the horse to drink.
True.
So witnesses can be forced in someone to come before you. And for a commission of inquiry which is seeking cooperation to inquire in as best as it can into a fact, if you force a witness to come, two things. The witness can exercise his power of silence, self-incrimination. The law allows a witness. And because the commission is a quasi-judicial body, the witness can invoke that. And the Constitution actually allows them to enjoy all these immunities and privileges of witnesses appearing before the High Court. So they can choose to appear before the commission and refuse to speak. They can choose to appear before the commission and be counterproductive.
So that's why you didn't push it?
No, I'm just saying, because of all these things, a complication of factors. We just thought.
Something happened, though, in talking about your past. Paul Adomotri, good friend of ours, was supposed to appear before the commission. He did come, very brief, was on this television program, and alleges that you had an agreement and produced WhatsApp messages, like chats that you had with him. If you had an agreement, why did you allow him to do what he had pre-advertised that he was coming to do?
There was never an agreement with any witness, and Paul Adomotri was one of the witnesses. There was never an agreement with any witness. I had interactions with Mr. Paul Adomotri prior to him coming before the commission. And the reason I had a prior interaction and engagement with him on the phone, which was the only person I ever had that interaction with, was because Mr. Paul Adomotri had a difficulty of appearing on a certain date. So I was trying to give him a concession in terms of which other date he will appear. Now, we had a packed schedule, as it's so clear, because of our time schedule and our time frame. And so I had a difficulty in trying to adjust or switch him. And that explained the back and forth, WhatsApp exchanges that I had with him. I haven't really listened to the tape in which those allegations and WhatsApp messages were
reproduced on television.
But if they were reproduced, and if they were accurately reproduced, I will not make any further comment on them except to say that they will speak for themselves, because it was as clear as daylight in terms of the availability, in terms of the difficulty that I had. And so I was basically just trying to find an adjustment opportunity for him. The difficulty with him was the fact that the commission was fundamentally focused on dealing with relevant witnesses. So the fundamental indicia for us deciding who a witness is before the commission is the factor of relevance. Now, to be relevant, you must satisfy one of three factors. One, you must have taken part in the activity on the ground, and therefore you've been implicated or you were involved in one shape or the other on the ground. Two, you were not on the ground, but you were in a certain command or control or supervisory position. And so, for example, for media houses, for example, maybe some of you were not actually there, but you sent people, and these people went and came back and reported to you. So you were in a direct report responsibility or position. And if you are not in any of these two categories, then you must fit in the third category. The third category is that you must fit in as an expert. Now, with the greatest respect, Paul Adomotri, or Mr. Paul Adomotri, appeared before the commission. The expectation or the understanding is that he was going to fit in one of these three categories. Now, I wasn't on the commission. I'm not, my commissioners took him through, and there were all kinds of exchanges. But one thing that became clear, and which is why the commission ultimately decided that they may not need to proceed further, was because the commissioners, in their judgment, came to the conclusion that of these three things that they were expecting, maybe he was in a reporting responsibility. In all of them, and from the exchanges that I had, he didn't appear to have actually fitted any of those. And that's why they thanked him for his desire to help. This is a national exercise, and therefore whoever decides to help in the process, in the enrichment of the process, the commission welcomes it. So the commission actually appreciated the fact that he tried helping, and
but in terms of real relevance, in terms of the three categories, he didn't fit in any of those?
I mean, he did because he was not on the ground, and I think
it wasn't a command position.
If I remember his testimony, where he said he wasn't reported. It wasn't like he sent someone there.
Was he invited? You invited him, nonetheless.
Correct. That's what I'm saying, and he was invited because of the understanding that somehow I think he was going to fit, particularly in respect of the fact that he was in a reporting responsibility. Yeah. And when I first got the interest from him that he was going to appear before the commission, because he expressed an interest that he was going to appear before the commission and to speak in this respect, the understanding was that he was coming to fit at least in one of these. That he wasn't there, but he has sufficient knowledge of what happened there by reason of a certain supervisory responsibility that he had over some other person who actually worked in the field. But again, from my understanding and from listening to the proceedings on that day, it didn't appear as if he fitted one of those. But the commission still recognized the fact that he tried to help, and I think he was treated with the best of decency and was thanked, and after a few questions, they basically discharged him.
So the report is gone. Your work is done, close shop, gone. You had nothing to do with this anymore?
Absolutely. Okay. I'm a citizen of Ghana, and that's it.
Okay, so your secretariat closed now?
The secretariat was officially demolished today. Well, not demolished, decommissioned.
Decommissioned
today.
Okay, so you are former dean?
Yes.
Private legal practitioner?
Correct.
Okay. Back to the mortals,
thank you.
I guess.
Thank you.
That's Kofi Abotsi, the former executive secretary to the Commission of Inquiry that looked into the West Wagon violence. My name is Evans Mins. Enjoy the rest of your evening.